Good God, you accursed. It's the very first curse of politics of 2022. We've got Jenni Byrne and Scott Reid here as always, and it's goddamn New Year's resolution time. You two don't strike me as the kind of people that really are resolute about New Year's resolutions. Do you do New Year's resolutions, Jenni?
No. I've done them in the past, and I always break them.
Totally. Never kept one. If it's a tough one, which is the whole point, I've never kept one. Scott?
Well, look, I resolved to day drink, so I'm pretty confident I can keep to my word on that. I don't know. Like, I hate New Year's. I hate the whole New Year's thing. New Year's is like, too much build up. You got to make New Year's great. Is New Year's great? And I hate New Year's. Plus 2022 sucks balls. Let's face it. It already, we're like, 9 minutes into it and it just blows donkey. It's terrible. And it's not getting better. I know people are like, oh, don't be such a pissy. It's
Oh, I don't.
It's busted. It's a busted road.
Scott, do you really think people are saying that? Because anyone I spoke to yesterday, especially if they're from the province of Ontario or the province of Quebec, they're like, there is no way it's fucking getting better. Like it's going to be 2022 is going to be worse than the last 2 years.
Well, I'm looking forward to June of 2022, but we can get to that later.
Ford rallied people. You're right, Jenni. Ford rallied people behind me. But on New Year's Day, I made like a little snide remark on Twitter about how, let's face it, it's going to suck. And I got a lot of grief. Don't be such a downer. Where's your optimism? I'm like, okay, well, I'll tell you what. You take my kids. You online school them.
All right. Well, it's been so long. What do we do on this show? Do we talk politics?
I don't think so. I think we start with music, then we go to the Habs, and then we light up a smoke and it's done.
I'm wearing my Mick Jagger shirt today because it feels like Gimme Shelter out there.
Benny got me a Johnny Cash shirt for Christmas, so my 12-year-old, so sporting that.
Very nice.
Very nice.
I'd like to. I think we should just forget the Habs today. Like I think we just kind of skip that part of the pod.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just point out to you that Max Pacioretty is still a star in the National Hockey League. Ontario is entering lockdown 3.0, or is it 7.0? I can't remember. And is it a lockdown if the malls are open anyway? Anyway, we'll talk about why this one smells more political than policy-based decision, what the leaders might gain or lose from it. I interviewed Anita Anand just before Christmas, you guys.
Yeah.
And she was damned impressive on the show. And it prompted more than a little bit of liberal leadership buzz on the socials. So where is the PM's head at right now? And will he run for a fourth time? And if not, who are the contenders? That's a fun one for today. We'll do our cursed clipping as we always do. And don't forget to stick around along with Gordon Pinsent for our first Hey Yous of 2022. So let's start with the liberal leadership question, you guys. So, we have, as I said, there was buzz about Anand and buzz about where she might fit into some of the other people who were speculated on. And I'll just say, I've had no patience for any of this conversation because I assumed, based on my theory about politics, that Trudeau was not leaving because people never leave. If that's wrong, then a whole bunch of things about my life are wrong.
Well, let's not hang it on that hook, Dave.
But I have to say, and a lot of people have been pointing out to me how disengaged Trudeau looks from his job right now, how disinterested he has appeared ever since the election in his job, and maybe for a little bit of time before that. You're starting to think maybe there's something unique happening here? Jenni, you've got some distance from this. What do you think?
Yeah, listen, I actually think, and I've said this before. I know, Scott, we all disagree, but and you guys know your party better than I do. I get the sense that Trudeau doesn't want to run again. He's shown nothing that would be the contrary. His last, to your point, David, the presser they had before Christmas in terms of COVID, Freeland was sitting there and she had papers and briefing notes in front of her, and she was wearing a suit, and she was like in a boardroom, and she had who was with her? There was someone beside. Carla. Qualtrough. And Trudeau, he was in the cottage, button-down shirt. He could have been lying on the couch for like the level of disinterest. Like he could have just been holding up his iPhone, lying on the couch, like
watching Bridgerton. Hey, can we get this over with quick, please?
Yeah. Eating popcorn. Like he seems to give like zero fucks on this. And so I think that I think that he also knows they're in for probably a long minority. The NDP are in no hurry to go. The Bloc are in no hurry to go. My party is embroiled in a lot of internal dynamics and are in no position to go. So I think this is going to be a long minority, but I personally would be surprised if he decides to run again.
Yeah. Scott?
I'm in the precise same place as you. There's a conflict between what I'm observing and what I've always resolutely felt, which is that prime ministers leave on their shield. They're carried off. They don't go willingly. And why would they? Because if you can become the prime minister, you must be obsessed with politics and all the things involved in politics. And I've seen people of remarkable talent, remarkable drive and ambition come nowhere near becoming prime minister, even though that's all that they wanted. And so the kind of person that becomes prime minister, to then have that position, it's almost inconceivable that you could imagine an occupation, a pursuit that would fulfill you in the same way. So I genuinely subscribe to the thesis that people who get that job don't want to leave that job. But I'm with you. Like, I'm with both you guys. Like, I mean, when you watch him, he does not appear to be a guy who's dialed in. And maybe he's just going through a thing, you know? I'm going through a thing like that right now. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a little on the couch, guys. I got to fucking break it to you. Right? I'm a little like, let's see what's on the next channel. I wonder if it's any better.
My motivation level is not A+ right now.
So, who knows? But
sorry, clients.
There's a dissonance there. I still think, because I keep struggling with this issue, it's kind of like, well, what's the alternative? And I don't know that there is one. And I don't mean in terms of candidate. I mean in terms of preoccupation for him. And so maybe he feels disengaged. I don't know. And who the fuck am I to say? Like, bullshit. I watch him on TV for 7 seconds. I psychoanalyze the guy. I know as much about this pen as I know about him. But I just think at the end of the day, I have a great difficulty believing that he's going to conclude that that's the thing to do.
But he could also leave it open and see where the polls are at. Like, as I said, I don't think we're anywhere close to having we're anywhere close to falling on any form of vote for a whole host of reasons. And so he can kind of see how things are going and decide to kind of step back, kind of a la Brian Mulroney in the early 90s and hand it off. I think it's in terms of candidates, I think it's evident that at least he and his people, they're doing everything they can to set Freeland up to be kind of the to kind of be the heir apparent to him. But I think I think that he might be the only person that knows what he wants to do in the next election, and he's got the luxury of time.
Absolutely. So Jenni, let's have some fun. I'll give you a field. I'll give you a field. Freeland, Champagne, Jolie, Anand, Mendocino, Kearney. Who do you least want to run against, Jenni?
Jesus. I think least probably Marco, because he's the only political person that, like, actually big P political person that you actually said in that lineup. I don't think Freeland is that political. I think she's a terrible communicator, and I think that all the other candidates have baggage. But so that's kind of what I would say. Is Marco's the only one that seems to be political in that group. and seems to kind of get the play. He's a guy that's out knocking on doors. He's a guy doing all of that stuff. I'm not sure the other ones fully get it. Marco had to. Scott, you guys are friends with him. You know it. He's one of the on that list. He's one of the only people that actually had to work to get the seat that he did, and then had to work from being a PS to work to be. He was a PS and then made his way up the ranks. He's the only one on that list that has actually gone the route that we have talked about in terms of hard work to get to where he is.
100%. But he's a guy. Yeah. He's a guy, which is going to be a disadvantage in this race if it happens. And the second thing is that the only winning theory for the Liberal Party runs through Quebec.
Yeah.
So anybody who's going to win the leadership of the Liberal Party is going to have established to the Liberal Party's satisfaction that they can win in Quebec.
But that's not the question you asked me. I'm just saying.
No. That's right. Sorry.
Well, what do you guys think?
Wait. You can't. We're playing bullshit imagination game. You can't change the rules of bullshit imagination game.
Well, I want to say, because I want to hear what you guys have to say. But David, I want to say about your interview with Anita and Ann. I thought one of the most interesting things she said was the fact that when you asked her about issues that came up in the election and what her constituents are saying, because Oakville is a very bellwether riding. It falls into the actual bellwether category, that she said paying down the debt and people worried that they don't want their kids and their grandkids having to pay down the debt. And I thought that was very interesting considering what the spending of her party and kind of what the mindset of most people within the Liberal Party are right now.
Yeah, it was definitely a comment that you don't hear at all out of the government. So it really stood out. Scott, what do you think about that field of mine? Who do you like?
I'm intrigued by three names, I think, in there. One, Marco, because he's a friend and because I admire the guy. And it's, Jenny, you described how he had a tough road to get there, but you left out the hardest part. He had to break through the clay soil of his nomination, running against Eve Adams, right? Who the prime minister sat next to, remember? And then they, and so, it's very unusual that, and I think it speaks to his greatest quality, that Marco could have not been the party's choice.
You don't hear much from Dimitri Soudis anymore, do you?
No. Which is a shame, really.
Jenny, look at you.
What? I'm smiling. I'm just smiling. I always smile.
But poor Marco, man, he's not the choice of the leader's office. He's not the choice of the campaign. He's not the choice of the party. He wins the thing through sheer elbow grease and hustle, and then manages the incredible trick of being a dude in Toronto and winning over the confidence of all those power circles, right? So that by the time they were even through their midway through their first term, they were kind of like, he became a go-to guy. Like, we got to manage a caucus issue. Let's get Marco on the line. And ultimately, it wasn't just the hard work. It was that plus that likability factor, right? Which just took him from a place where he was not the party's choice to being a place where he's a prominent cabinet minister. Now we're talking about him as potential leadership. So and he's a buddy, and I'm in his riding and all that stuff. So I'm intrigued by that. And all the handicapping you put forward, David, is important, right? No Quebec credentials, is a white dude, all those things. I'm interested by Kearney, because to me, Kearney is somebody who comes from the outside, brings a bunch of stuff. I wish he was already in caucus. I fear the Bob Rae 2006 phenomenon where he's not in caucus makes him hard to sort of like come in and just swoop in and take the leadership. Plus, doesn't get the political fucking workout, of monkeying around and being in caucus. And as we know, like all that stuff, like shoveling that shit and shoveling that gravel is good for you. But what's he going to be like as a candidate if he should run? Is he the guy who gives like boring speeches about the fiscal stability forum, or is he a financial stability forum, or is he going to be like a guy who's got an intriguing different thesis, all that stuff? And then finally, Jolie, and I say Jolie because,
well, that's an interesting question, because his public performances he's one of these people,
inconsistent.
You hear about them in politics all the time. In public, he's been pretty dry and pretty careful, and in person, he's as charming a person as you can meet, which is one of the reasons why he moves in the circles he moves in, because people like being around him.
Charming, witty, humble, right? Doesn't give off, get a fucking load of me. I was a central bank governor for 2 nations. Like, but will that translate? And can he pull that off? Can he make the screen sparkle in the way that Trudeau does without effort?
Well, and to your point of Marco being a dude, David, there's a lot of Kearney gets away with a lot of things that he says and does in terms of Brookfield is net zero, the fact that Brookfield is plays a major role, or the major stakes in non-renewable resource projects. If I was running a campaign in a leadership against Mark Carney, I would basically be going after him on this, because it's a bread and butter issue for your party. So I'd be not only going after him on the fact that this is, his paycheck is coming from a company that, invests in oil and gas and around the world, but also that he's a hypocrite on top of it.
I want it to be Kearney, because every time his name comes up, you guys, like conservatives, I know that streak of conservatives, you, Jenny, and your brethren, so to speak, you guys get wound up like a whippoorwill's whale's ass about it. You went from zero to hypocrite in 12 seconds.
But he's a hypocrite. I actually would love to take on Mark Carney in the next election. I'd say bring it the fuck on.
All right.
Well, so what? I'll tell you what. You know what? You got it, Jenny, because in 2 years, I will be very happy to be running the person that knows more about the economy than anybody in the world against Aaron O'Toole. Like, I just think that would be okay.
Yeah, well, we'll see if Aaron's the leader of our party.
You got work to do. The last one I'll just mention quick is Jolie, and the reason I say Jolie is for the reasons you mentioned, David. Right? I've never been blown away by Jolie, but I've never studied her that closely. And we talked about this in a previous pod. I mean, she's somebody who took a punch, got up off the canvas, and elevated. She was
your
herself.
Comeback person of the year for 2021.
I think it's hard to pick somebody who's a better candidate for that. And so she's female, so she can compete against Freeland. If Freeland is sort of the institutional choice, she can go in there and compete in a way that's a more open field for her than it will be for the likes of Marco or Mark. And then also she brings the Quebec factor, as you mentioned, which I think is gotta be vital to any sensible calculation of the party's fortunes. So I think, all that's interesting, but, I just think we're jerking off. Like, it's fun. I mean, so to speak. Just got to put this magazine down for a moment.
Not as much fun as an actual campaign, right, Scott? Do you keep the metaphor going there?
That's right. Yeah. I think you may have lost me on the metaphor there. But I come back to it. I struggle.
Scott, do you remember sex?
Yeah, no, fuck. I don't know. Is it coming in a bottle? I have a hard time believing Trudeau won't run again.
Yeah.
And thank you for not answering that question with the bottle.
All right. That's enough of that. Fun. I mean, Jolie, I think, has just by biography ticks off 2 big boxes. And it does appear, from what I can gather from soundings, as if the Quebec Party is choosing her generally over Champagne as their champion. So I think she's going to be a serious player. She just hasn't, in English Canada, demonstrated the chops to merit that job. And so somehow in foreign affairs, she's got to find a way to make an impression in English Canada that makes people think she could be the prime minister.
Well, she'll have Dominic Barton's support because, of course, she feels he's one of Canada's great diplomats. Go down in the history books.
Yeah, it's probably not an endorsement you're looking for, especially not in the Liberal leadership. Here we are, Hurly-Burlyites, at the time of year where I like to mix my rum and regret cocktail. I start by filling a glass with ice. Then 3 parts rum, 2 parts cola, and 1 part deep reflection on the year just passed. And then I add a single tear, just to give it that extra personal kick. I'm kidding. As we've been talking these last couple of weeks, this is giving season. The good people at TELUS who present our show believe in giving. It's a core value of the company, 365 days a year. In fact, they've been called the most giving company with contributions of over $1.2 billion to charitable organizations in Canada. Well, TELUS has a challenge for all you caring and influential Hurly-Burlyites to help them give more. It's a real challenge, about spreading both the good word and good works, and TELUS urges you to take it up. This year, as you're reaching out to your local charitable and community organizations, shelters, senior centers, women and children's charities, and the like, if you could just make them aware that TELUS has a number of giving programs that can help so many vulnerable Canadians get connected to technology. We've talked about mobility for good and internet for good already. This week, I'd like to tell you about Tech for Good, which happens to be pretty close to my heart. Tech for Good provides individualized training and support to people with disabilities so they can independently use and get all the benefits out of their mobile devices. As you can imagine, it results in better quality of life and more personal empowerment. These programs are so important for vulnerable Canadians, Hurley-Burleyites. So take up the challenge and make sure your local organizations know about Tech for Good. Because when technology becomes more equal for all of us, the country is just so much better off. To find out more, go to telus.com/connectingcanada. All right, it's time for our clipping of the day, and Scott Reid chose our clipping of the day. And what is it, Scott?
It's a piece that ran a few days past from John Ibbotson, Globe and Mail, longtime Globe and Mail columnist, wrote, David, a voluminous feature on you 15 years ago. Jenny, I'll have to dig this up somewhere and send it to you. It's unbelievable. I think it was about 77,000 words, this piece, right? Photographs of David, talked about how he was conquering the world.
He actually went to Freeland, Saskatchewan. Boy, that caused a stir in that little town.
And he's, he was the author along with Daryl, what's his name there on
Daryl Bricker.
Daryl Bricker, the book that said that it was impossible for the Conservatives to ever lose. They would reign hegemonically for eternity. They claim there was an asterisk at the back of that book or something. I don't know. Anyway,
and fun fact, Aaron O'Toole gave that book to Olive Caucus this year for Christmas.
You're insane. Are you kidding me?
Here's a 6-year-old book, guys. Merry Christmas.
A 6-year-old book that history has discredited. That's insane. That's unbelievable.
You know why he would have done that? Because their whole theory was about the suburbs. And their whole theory was about how the suburbs were increasingly going to be small C conservative, as long as the Conservatives wrapped their heads around social, social issues, blah, 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 blah.
Well, John wrote a piece. And Jenny, you're going to laugh. He wrote a piece because it's in my wheelhouse. Because the piece is, what happens if, Trump wins the White House again, or Trumpian forces take over, and you see all these legislatures across the U.S. and various states moving these sort of, anti-democratic, undemocratic things, to deny voting rights to a variety of people and all this sort of stuff. And it's all powered by Thomas Homer Dixon, who's now there's a bunch of international media that's flipping off of his comments saying look, what is the world going to do if America chooses totalitarianism? And the thing
we have to bring in Superman at that point, right, Scott? There's nobody in the Marvel universe that is capable of managing
no.
This situation.
Well, it's hard to say. It depends. The Eternals, maybe, but really, the movie wasn't good enough, and I'm just not sure that they've rooted themselves in the public consciousness. I think you got to bring in Soups. But, it's a typical John Ibbotson piece. It's sort of, it's wickedly breathless. My God, is Canada going to have to confront the United States and say, people, don't choose this guy? And now I'm arguing Jenny's thesis, right? Because Jenny's always making fun of me for don't get all wound up about Trump. But I'm like, it's just kind of ridiculous. And then it ends with a fizzle going, well, we shall see. There's probably not much we can do about it. And there isn't much we can do about it.
He talked to 3 experts, all of whom told him there was nothing we could or should do about it.
There was absolutely no.
So that was the second half of his column, which kind of didn't.
And it just and then the ass fell out of it. It just kind of went, and so. I don't know.
No, but
stuff will happen. Who knows?
It was the same columns that were being written in leading into the 2016 election with Trump, and America and democracy still exist after Trump. It actually reminded me, we have an incredible self-worth. We have an incredible superiority complex when it comes to the U.S. It's like the scene in Mad Men where Don Draper's with the guy in the elevator, and the guy says, I really feel sorry for you. And Don Draper looks at him and says, I don't think about you at all. That's ultimately what the U.S. is Don Draper. And so I don't understand why we think what are we going to do if the Americans elect Trump or someone Trump-like, as Ibbotson says. I don't understand what that means. And I don't think that there is any threat on American democracy, regardless of who ends up winning the next election. So I think it was a very bizarre article all around to read. But
I know what I'm going to do. There's nothing for Canada to do. Canada's just fucked. I accept Ibbotson's angst and Thomas Homer Dixon's angst. I think Trump's either going to win the next election or lose it so narrowly that his supporters don't accept that. Chaos results from all that. I'm going to buy my brother's place in Costa Rica, and I'm going to live off the land in the Costa Rican rainforest. That's my plan for the next Trump administration. I don't know what you people are going to do.
But why? Like, I actually don't think Trump will end up winning the GOP primary. I think that the election that they had, the few elections that they had in the first week of November, showed that like people still want a populist. They still like the Trump policies, but it's evident that Trump is so polarizing. I think the GOP is gonna realize that. Has realized that because they saw how they picked up in those elections, and I think we'll see the same. We'll see the same in the midterms. But I'm not sure how Trump is worse for Canada than what we've had with Biden. We actually got a lot more concessions, and we actually in terms of trade and disputes than what Biden did. If you look at the stimulus bill that didn't end up going through the House of Representatives, that was not good for Canada. Anywhere from software, lumber to aluminum to electric cars, the first thing he did was kill Keystone. So I'm not certain from a Canadian point of view why we would think that Trump or a Trump-like person is going to be bad for Canada.
Well, that last point is indisputable in the sense that I think protectionist politics are in the United States to stay for the foreseeable future.
Regardless of who the president or
who controls Congress.
But that's not the only lens through which I look at this thing. What can I say? I mean, I'm like you. I share, David. I share the angst of all those that express concern about it, and I don't look at it solely through the lens of, well, what's on balance. How does it line up in terms of transactional benefits, one way or the other? Because I assume that all White Houses are going to basically do what's best for America first, and for us second, if ever at all. But like, Trump does institutionalize, and the Trump movement institutionalizes a bunch of corrupt, lying, thieving bullshit, and it's bad. And so I just think on that more fundamental level, and when people start to accept that, and what starts there drifts here. It infects our politics, it infects our rhetoric, it infects our dialogue. And so, I do look upon it with troubling eyes, but I'm not so silly as to imagine that we can do something about it. Like, I don't even know what would you do?
Here's an idea. We retain Stéphane Dion. What is Stéphane Dion doing right now, by the way? Is he a diplomat of the government of Canada?
Yeah, I think isn't he in Brussels?
I thought, remember, he was EU and Germany, and then I think he lost one of those posts.
Well,
right?
Germany wouldn't accept it, or one of them wouldn't accept it. I can't remember. The guy went into the ether as near as I can tell. But in any event, they should bring him back, and he should write letters to the Americans. Last time that public opinion was swung like this, it was a result of Stéphane Dion writing open letters to the Quebec government. There we go. Canada, sharp letter to follow.
But I'm not sure how it permeates into our politics. Like Trudeau was prime minister for the entire time that Trump was president. He's the anti-Trump, so to speak. But in terms of the Liberals shut down Parliament simply because they didn't want to turn over documents to committees. Like, the only reason, it's become more evident that the only reason that the Liberals decided to call an election when they did is because they were getting hammered in different committees between we and COVID spending and what have you, and they wanted to shut that down. They wanted a majority to be able to shut down committees. It's not like all of it. We are like, Trudeau is like the Democrat. Let's open up the kimono, so to speak, and we are so self-righteous on this. I don't understand, how does it permeate into our politics? It's not like basic. I don't understand that comment, Scott.
Well, it permeates into our politics in all sorts of ways. First of all, I'm about to say. So it permeates into our politics. First of all, most fundamentally across, I think, almost all parties in terms of electoral techniques and campaign techniques. So increasingly, we've talked about this, increasingly you see that there's solely a focus on micro-targeting of your base and motivating, doing anything you can to motivate your base. That is often, and it doesn't take a fucking genius to find out that what motivates your base is less hope than anger. right? Anger is a more efficient and quick route to getting people's money and getting their activism. And so you get this sort of micro-targeting, this very focused, everybody.
Well, but that's not new. It's not new.
No, but it's
not new. There's a reason you guys would go after.
I wasn't finished. Okay. Jesus H. Christ. So that's one thing. That is, you can say it's not new, but it's been intensified and institutionalized on both sides of the border. And the second thing, and most fundamentally, is that there's a culture of telling people bullshit, things that are bullshit, saying it to the point where you believe your own bullshit. There's just this campaign on lies. It's no good. And tearing at institutions and saying that the problem with our politics are the institutions. This shit gets peddled by the people who seek to lead those institutions. So you foul your own nest, and it's a terrible, terrible circuit that we put ourselves on. And that is for sure bleeding over into our politics.
I think it's, but bleeding over how? Give an example.
I see it all the time in conservative politics. I see it with social media campaigns in conservative politics. I see it also in other kinds of politics, but particularly among social conservatives.
Justin Trudeau went out last week and said that anyone that wasn't vaccinated are racist and misogynists. Right. That's a Trump-like thing to say.
It's an ugly thing to say, for sure.
No, it's a terrible thing to say. That's Justin Trudeau, a guy, by the way, who is dressed in blackface. So more times than he can count. I saw a new picture was online yesterday that we had not seen. So do not say it's conservative politics. Justin Trudeau said that about a segment of the population.
So we can do this false equivalency thing, or we can say that this stuff is overwhelmingly rooted on the right. And you and I won't agree about it.
But Scott and David, you guys don't tell me it's new. You guys ran campaigns where all you talked about were guns and abortion 20 years ago when we were first doing campaigns against each other. So please do not say it's a conservative thing, and please do not say it's a new thing, because that is wrong.
I don't have white gloves on. I'm not saying that I won't campaign rough.
No, but do not say it's
that is not true. We also said you'd end Medicare.
And you're gonna scrap the notwithstanding clause with same-sex marriage. And anyways, we all know how it turned out.
I wish the fuck we had scrapped the notwithstanding clause.
We all know how that turned out. So anyways, I'm saying do not say it's new, and do not say it's a phenomenon with conservatives. It's just because you guys are still irrational.
Well, let me know the list of things I am allowed to say, and
I don't. No. You can say what you want. I just disagree with you. I'm just saying you cannot with any credibility say that this is new or this is a conservative thing. And going back to what I said earlier,
I think it's intensified in the conservative movement. I'm sorry. I know you don't want to hear that, but I think that.
Yeah, but I fundamentally disagree with you. It goes into the cloud that you guys have on Trump. But I think this is a moot point because I do not think he's going to be the nominee in the next election.
I have a hard time sometimes figuring out as I listen to this conversation whether I look on the past with rose-colored glasses, because for the first half of this conversation, I was tempted to jump in and say, "Come on, the Republican Party is full of rot and is not making a reasonable contribution toward the public debate right now because the things they profess to believe are crazy in the Republican Party." But I don't know if I've ever believed anything different than that. I believed that about Reagan. And maybe now I can look back and say that Reagan was the golden era of Republicanism, but I don't think it was. And a lot of damaging things come from Reagan. I don't know. Maybe I've just never liked maybe I just am incapable of liking the Republican Party, but I tend to see it through the same lens that Scott does, which is that I don't know that I draw an equivalence and I don't, in fact, draw an equivalence between the Republican Party and the Conservatives in Canada. I think the Republican Party's gone over a specific line with regard to elections.
I agree with that. I wasn't saying that.
Yeah.
I think it bleeds into. I'm not saying that it's manifested the same dimension. But last word on this I would throw out is, and I think we'll all agree on this bullshit about, well, it's anti-democratic and, all this. Look, they're using democratic means to advance their objectives. Like they get elected in state legislatures, they get elected gubernatorial governments, right? And so as a consequence, then they're able, to put in place whatever voting rights changes and all that kind of stuff. So all that takes you to is it isn't going to be a letter from Canada or a sternly worded admonition from G7 colleagues. You can only beat them at the ballot box, right? If you don't like the way voting rights are going in the United States, don't get them elected. offer something better, get yourself elected. And the Democrats ultimately are the people that I reserve my greatest anger for, because I look at them and I go, you guys can't wipe your own ass. Like, it's a disaster area. And I fear, it's like I said before, I hope they lose so savagely in these midterms that it forces them to say, we got to do whatever it takes in order to get our act together for 2024.
There's three parties in the United States. The Democrats are two parties.
Yeah.
Democrats are a centrist wing and a left wing. And most of the people that used to be establishment Republicans are now Democratic centrists, like those Lincoln Project guys. So our sponsor, CN, likes to say that it's building the railroad of the future. That means a bunch of things: more precise scheduling, creating a more diverse workforce, acquisition of cutting-edge technology. You know, modern trains are becoming rolling computers. Safety, 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 and containing climate change, among others. On that last file, CN's relentless work on shrinking its carbon footprint is paying off. In fact, CN has just been named to the environmental A list by CDP, an international nonprofit that scores companies worldwide on their dedication to building a sustainable economy. CDP stands for Carbon Disclosure Project. A list means, well, A list. This year, CDP assessed nearly 12,000 companies. 200 were singled out as high performers. Companies CDP says are leading the way to a net zero future. CN is pretty proud of that. Pretty proud. Actually, CN's approach to greening its operations is quite simple: transporting cargo with a minimal impact on our environment. Since 1993, CN has reduced emissions from locomotives by 43%, thereby avoiding 48 million tons of GHG emissions that would otherwise have gone into the atmosphere. The railway has ordered a fleet of electric trucks for the final mile of delivery and has even commissioned a battery electric locomotive. It's an indisputable industry leader in fuel efficiency and is working to lower fossil fuel consumption even further. And just recently, CN joined the Race to Zero campaign, committing to setting targets in line with the goal of holding global warming to 1.5 degrees by 2050. Hurly-burlyites have heard me say this before. One train takes hundreds of trucks off of our highways. CN provides a greener, not to mention much more dependable, supply chain. That's what the railroad of the future means. So let's move on to something less controversial: COVID. So I just want to start by saying to any accursed out there who are listening or watching, we are not scientists or doctors. Please do not take your medical or public health information from this podcast. We're talking about politics, and we're talking about it based on what we know about it. And so here's my first question for our little group here. What can explain, not the decisions themselves, but the way the Ford government makes its decisions about COVID? So this last example was Moore comes out, the chief doctor says some stuff a few days ago. Government doesn't contradict, everybody presumes he's speaking on the government's behalf. Then all of a sudden, no really new data that anybody's aware of. Big emergency cabinet meeting. Everybody knows this big emergency cabinet meeting is happening. It apparently meets for hours and hours. And then they announce a very different set of policies, including school closures. So everybody knew those facts, but just it is so confusing to me how these people make these decisions and what their processes are. What is actually going on there? Does anybody know? Like, what would have changed from Moore's statement to the cabinet meeting? What kind of inputs are they responding to? And what's with this, at the end of the day, 10-hour cabinet meeting process? Jenny, am I being too harsh?
No, listen, I actually I can't give an answer as to what happened between Thursday and Sunday yesterday when the announcement on the lockdown happened. And it's not unique to Ontario. You look at Quebec and BC as well, who've seemingly made very overarching decisions regarding COVID and lockdowns that isn't rooted in data. So I don't understand personally what kind of changed, because there's no evidence in terms of why they're doing it. It was always, remember, 2 weeks to flatten the curve so hospitals don't get overwhelmed. We have less people in ICU now than what we did at the heart of Delta, and so I can't understand why they're making the decisions. They're making the decisions that they're making, to be perfectly honest. But I think people are disingenuous. So I just want to say, I put out a tweet before Christmas that basically I was sick of seeing doctors on Twitter telling people that they were canceling their Christmas plans and they weren't going to see their family, and it's all this tough. And I just basically said, we've been, it is. I find it shameful that doctors were going out and basically browbeating or telling people that they shouldn't see their families for a second year in a row. And I got ratioed, which I personally don't care about. But even, my friend Jerry Butts, for example, was one person that tweeted at me. And it's kind of like, it's the other side. We've lost the plot. So a lot of liberals are going after Doug now in terms of ICU capacity. When Trudeau called on election day, we had 704 people in ICUs in Canada. We have 500 today. We only have 248 people as of yesterday in ICUs in Ontario. And we have 700 open beds on November 2nd at the height of COP, when the entire world, the elites and climate change activists and the Jerry Butts flew off to COP and other international conferences. We had 621 people in Canada in the ICUs. And so I think there's a bit of hypocrisy here, but I don't know if Doug and his cabinet got spooked. But I don't understand why they've made it. And I know we'll get into this. I'll let you guys weigh in. This seems to me, in terms of the reaction that I'm hearing from people, this seems to be much different than the lockdowns that we've had previously, especially parents talking about kids in school.
Scott, before we move on, do you have anything to say about this process of the government, the way they make decisions?
I know I've mentioned it before. I find it baffling. I find the fact that, just based on the cabinet decisions and discussions that I've been exposed to and participated in on the margins, the little desk in the corner, what seems different is that it seems like the Ford government has these long cabinet meetings where the center doesn't direct. It's almost like they walk in, they go, well, the doctors have told us X. Now let's have an argument about it. And then Ford tries to sort of assess, I guess he's trying to use his cabinet as a model for Ontario. He just sort of assesses how strenuously people argue and then sees if there's any way to kind of box it. And so to me, that seems like a lack of leadership. To me, I would expect the core political judgment to be made and almost a proposition be put forward. So you carry into cabinet and say, look, here's the advice we've gotten. Here's the political screen we're applying to it. This is therefore the recommendation and the policy that we're putting forward. Now let's have an argument about it. And by the way, as Premier, I'm permitting you guys to tell me to go fuck myself. Let's have a genuine argument about it. But it's on the basis of responding to a firm response. My sense is that it's just wide open. And then they try to patch it together based on what all the various people say. And so you get these contradictory stuff. Now, I will say this. I had this discussion with someone over the holidays. And they acted, somebody who hasn't steeped in politics like us, and they acted like I was an idiot, like I was a jerk for complaining about that. They're like, well, Jesus Christ. They're talking about shutting down schools. They got to talk about whether or not bars and restaurants are going to stay open, how much we move and circulate in our society. Ought they not to sit around and have an argument for 10 hours? I thought, maybe I'm just being a smug inside dink, so I thought that was interesting. But to me, it's kind of all a function of Ford trying to be a populist all the time, right? Never really wanting to sort of take the reins, wants everybody to like the decisions he's making. And it's impossible, if you're going to follow the advice of the table and shape public policies around it that lead you to lockdowns and this kind of stuff, it's impossible to be liked when you do that. And it's even more impossible to be liked if you say one thing on Thursday and then on Sunday you say something else. And it's like, well, what we know that the tabled data didn't dramatically change. We know, like Jenni says, well, the data is where the beds are where they are compared to November. But that's not what they're arguing about. They're arguing about where's it going in the next 3 weeks. And they're saying it's going through the roof, and staffing in hospitals and healthcare workers are dropping like flies, and we're just not going to be able to sustain it. And so they're saying, therefore, we must. And, so when you get these when you get these incoherent, no context, no plan, and you flip from one thing to another in a small number of days, I think that undermines the integrity of what you're saying. And it just opens the door for people to say, not only do I not like it, but now I don't know whether I can trust it. Well,
and Scott, to your point, I agree. I think it's interesting, though there's a difference because there's a difference between capacity and hospitals not having the staff resources. And I think that that's what's becoming evident now is everyone felt it. Capacity was how the 2-week flat in the curve was capacity. Now we're looking at the problem is its staffing levels. And I think that there is less sympathy or less patience with Ontarians in terms of that, because they're looking at it going, okay, you guys have had 2 years between the bureaucrats, between the political actors, between the hospitals. You guys have had 2 years to figure this out in terms of staffing. And there's things they could have done. They could have, foreign trained doctors, sped up that process. They could have gone into nursing schools, into the colleges and universities, because the last year of nursing for nursing students is basically 100% practicum. You're doing doing clinical work. So they could have had nursing students do certain shifts and train the nurses that are there in terms of ICU. Like, I think there's a whole host of things they could do, but the problem they have now is they're trying, it's kind of going back in the time machine to March of 2020, and people are expecting more. March of 2020, they were willing to give politicians and governments a bit of leeway because it's relatively new, but we're 22 months into this now. So I think that the fact that the government's messaging essentially is the same as what it was a year and a half ago or 22 months ago leads to another problem, is because everyone now knows someone that has had COVID. They have had COVID. That's the one thing this new variant has done. So the fear of the unknown is not there like what it once was as well.
So, the governments must have assumed, as I did, but the governments must have assumed all the way along that this was going to end sooner than it has. So, because I think if you thought in March 2020 that we'd still be battling this 2 years later, you would have done some different things as a government. You would have invested in capacity if you thought you were still going to be dealing with this 2 years later. So they must have assumed that they weren't going to be. But I think one of my challenges, and Scott, you and I both said this on Twitter in various ways, I don't know what success looks like anymore. I don't know what we're trying to accomplish. I don't know how to assess what the government's doing, because I don't know what outcome we're looking for. I don't even know what outcome is possible anymore. So you sort of, as a citizen, just feel like you're stumbling along in the dark, being asked to do things that you don't know really what they're supposed to accomplish, with the one exception of healthcare capacity.
But isn't it we're to the point where it's learning to live with it or adapting to live with it? Like, it's COVID for the most part in the US is done. And it's not that Biden stood up and declared COVID done. It's the Americans basically stood up and said, we're not fucking doing this anymore. So Biden basically stood up and said, we're not closing down schools. We're going on with life. Everyone, please get vaccinated. And so I think that it's ultimately going to be Canadians, Ontarians, that decide how much they're going to put up with, knowing that we're not just flattening the curve, or we're not just doing this for 2 weeks or 2 months. I think that if people knew in March and April of 2020 that we would be sitting here now, I think you would see a lot less compliance, or you would see a lot more questions to governments in terms of the decisions that they were making, to your point, David.
Except I don't know that we have I don't know that just because populations dislike it. I mean, Christ, I dislike it. I've got 2 kids that are going to have to go into online learning as of tomorrow. It's a nightmare. New York, Texas, Florida, they're already starting to feel that. Like, just say, well, we're done with it. We can't be done with it. If the healthcare system, and I'm sorry, you say it's just a capacity in terms of staffing, but it isn't. I mean, if the modeling turns out to be the case, and there's no reason to really dispute that it will, then it will.
The modeling hasn't, Scott, the modeling's never been right. How can you say you can't dispute the modeling? When has the modeling been right in the 22 months?
You can't make policy based on what was happening yesterday. You must make policy based on what you responsibly fear can happen tomorrow.
But we're 22 months in. We actually can make policy based on experience, and any modeling that the government has put out has come nowhere close to where it.
I don't know that that's uniformly true, but look, my point is this: we can't simply assume that we can say sorry. We're just going to ignore it, learn to live with it. I mean, learn to live with it. Someone talked about, well, what if you adopted the UK approach? And one expert's online last night saying, if you overlay that into Ontario, it means 60,000 people probably die from on a percentage basis. That's probably what it means. 60,000 more Ontarians die. So if you're cool with that, I guess, but shouldn't we try to stop that? But last thing I would say, but one last thing, we may all be wrong in terms of what the politics of this are. As frustrated and angry as people are and as unhappy with it, Greg Lyle did a poll that came out of field on the 22nd of December, and I noticed that he posted it last night. And one of the things that frankly surprised me was that at that point, when he asked about whether people felt that restrictions were too loose or too grave, people felt they were too loose. So, I mean, the government may also be in possession of
people didn't. People didn't. The largest chunk of people did.
That's right.
That's what makes this so complicated.
Right.
Right. There's no consensus.
So the challenge is and I think the interesting politics of this is if there's like 39%, which is a nice sizable percentage of the population that says, you know what, I reluctantly have to live with greater restrictions because I buy the trade-off. That 39% may not be Doug's 39%, right? That's the problem, right? Like, I mean, that may not be reflective of it may be exclusive of the conservative base. So then he's got it coming and going. He gets undermined by his own base, and people think that he's too slow and ineffective and incoherent who are in the middle.
But I think that the thing is with restrictions, though, it's whatever people think that they are. Everyone has a different thing that is a priority for them. So, you've got, and I don't think it's even crosses party lines. I think it's become more of a class system. The people, like, depending on where you find yourself. So you've got boomers, regardless of what political stripe they are. They could have voted. They could vote Liberal. They could vote Conservative, and they live on pensions. They've got a big house. They've got a backyard. As long as they can golf and play pickleball, they're happy. Like, keep the restaurants closed. I just want to let me play my fucking pickleball, man. And then I didn't even know what pickleball was, by the way, before COVID. And people talked about
Never heard of it.
It's a big fucking thing. But then you've got, parents with school age children that for them, they could care less about anything regardless, unless, people are in school. And so I think the problem with just saying blanket restrictions is I think that question means different things to different people.
Okay, Jenny, we got time for one more. We got time for one more subset of this topic, and you just led me to where I want to go with it, which is one of the most perplexing things about this to me politically is why no government has just gone out and aced the schools, aced the school preparation thing. I mean, it seems to me to be the obvious point of most political pressure. It seems to me to be the most defensible, obvious thing you can be doing. But there doesn't appear to be a government in the country that has systematically said what almost everybody's saying, which is let's get ventilation, let's deal with the air quality in the schools, and let's get people proper masks, and let's have them rapid tested, and let's just keep the schools safe and get kids in them. But no government's taken that on seriously. And to me, it was an obvious political potential win, but certainly loss if you didn't do it.
Yeah, listen, I think if Stephen Del Duca decided that if he wanted to pick one issue leading into the next 6 months, if I were him, I would become the king of trying to keep the schools open. I don't care about anything else, but I would be pressuring. I would be reaching out to parents who are very frustrated right now and say, this is my only priority. Of course, you have to have other things, but I would become the person that I'm going to keep your kids in school. And that's it. Like, shut everything else down. But this is what the Liberal priority is going to be. I think that would be smart. Smart for him. And to your point, David, I think this is the frustration parents have. And Scott, you are one. So, but I can tell you, like, I spoke with a few of my friends that have kids, my relatives. A friend called me yesterday. His kids, when they had to break the news that they weren't going to school, bawled and cried and said, no, Daddy, please, I want to go to school. Please, like just tell them I want to go to school. You know, you've got
cats living with dogs, man. What is going on? Kids begging to go to school.
But because they're just like, I have another friend whose 14-year-old daughter basically became extremely withdrawn over the last, year. And was only starting to kind of come out of her shell and back to normal. And then basically, had to be told yesterday she wasn't going to school. And so I think I think the pressure on families is going to be even bigger in terms of the school. And I think that this is going to be unlike any lockdown that they have done in the past, because I think that the emotions around with parents in school, I think it felt different yesterday in terms of the reaction to this. And also I feel that like, what I would say to governments is it's actually almost like the 10% of Ontarians that haven't been vaccinated. I think it's unfair to say the 10% that fall into the anti-vax category, like the people protesting Trudeau in the election. I think they're a very small group. I still think there are people that are hesitant about getting the vaccines. And I think that basically shutting down everywhere where, we've been showing a vaccine passport or what have you for 6 months, shutting down all those places actually feeds into we're going to get everyone people vaccinated with 3 shots are getting it, and people vaccinated with 3 shots are giving it to people. So it feeds into this. I actually think it feeds into a narrative that is going to, that feeds into people being afraid to get vaccines, which are safe.
On that point, I think there's actually going to be, I really think what you said earlier was important, right? Which is that putting a partisan spectrum analysis on this may not be the smartest way of looking at it, but that kind of cultural overlay, socioeconomic, cultural, all that stuff. I think there's deep resonance to what you say there. And as an extension of that, I actually think that one of the dangers that we may have is that when among the vaccinated and the boosted, which are the overwhelming majority, if they begin to conclude that the reason that we have to endure these hardships is because our healthcare system is in peril, and the reason our healthcare system is in peril is because it's being dominated by unvaccinated, then I think you may see that cultural divide and that anger, and it calls for people to say, wait, in order for my kids to go to school, right? If what we need to do for my kids to go to school is tell people they have to get their vaccine or they can stay in their fucking root cellar, well, then they can stay in the root cellar. And that tension, that social tension may become exacerbated after a couple of weeks of this stuff. When Doug stands up 2 weeks from now and says, listen, folks, there's nothing I would rather be saying less than this, but we have to extend this. And that's what's going to happen. It could get ugly out there in terms of that divide. It could get really, really ugly.
Well, it'll be interesting to see also if the government, they've promised now to start reporting as to who is in hospitals, who are in ICUs because of COVID, or who are in hospitals, who are in a hospital for another reason and happen to test positive for COVID. And that has been one thing. And I know we talked about it on the pod right at the start, is there is a difference if you fall off a roof, or you're shoveling your driveway and crack your head, or you're in a car accident, you happen to be tested for COVID. You're not in the ICU because of that. You're in the ICU because you've been in a car accident or what have you. And I think that that's going to be very important. The government should have been relaying that all along, because it's very misleading in terms of the actual reporting as to people that are in hospital because of, as opposed to with COVID.
But if you're in an ICU, wait a second, I don't know anything about this, but if you're in an ICU, you're unvaccinated.
Not necessarily.
Pretty close. I looked at the data yesterday, the most recently published data, which I think was from the day prior, and say per million residents in Ontario, per million people in Ontario, 121.8 in ICU are unvaccinated. Those who are vaccinated, what they constitute per 1 million, 6. So, I mean, that's what I mean when that dissonance, if people start to equate that dissonance, this is why our healthcare system is in peril. And this is why I have to suffer these lockdown hardships. If people start to make that equation and they say, listen, you could see 80% turn on the 20% and go, I've had enough. Okay. So fuck you. You don't get to make a choice anymore.
But Scott,
Last word, Jenny.
But that's why it's important for governments to say you could be unvaccinated in ICU and it may not be, you might not be there because of COVID. You might be there for the reasons that I stated. So
at some point, people don't give a fuck.
Like, yeah, but this is no, but they should. This is why people don't want to be ruled by fear anymore. So if they're going to, they can't go out there and say, what they're doing is just it would be in no government's interest to foster fights between people that are vaccinated or unvaccinated. That's why they have to be truthful. Trudeau's got to stop the fucking rhetoric and calling people names, and governments have to be more transparent. Because if there was an increase in hospitalizations or in COVID hospitalizations, so to speak, or people with COVID in hospitals a month and a half ago in Edmonton. It wasn't because there was rampant COVID. It was because there was an ice storm and like 300 people ended up in the hospital with broken legs, broken wrists, concussions, because they were shoveling their driveway or trying to get to their car and fell. And so I think that if we're going to have like an honest debate, governments have to start being more honest than what they have been with people in the last 22 months.
All right, Gordon Pinsett, help us wrap this up. We obviously have more material that we can cram into one show. In our first return from vacation, we should go daily, maybe. All right, Gordon.
Oh,
bring it home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay. Who's got a Hey You?
Daily. Add to the burden. Why don't you come in? You help Sam online learn in French, doing math in French on his computer. Why don't you do that for a couple hours and then you do your daily podcast, Dave? Fuck,
well,
man.
He could do as well as I did in those subjects if I tutored him.
Exactly. That's
Who's
my
starting?
problem.
Yeah, I'll start. My Hey You is to all the opposition parties in terms of the economy. We're seeing record gas prices now, seemingly up to $1.61 here in Ontario, $1.62 per liter. It's going to get as high as $1.70, and as well as the increased inflation, which we have talked about, that is rising, that is costing Canadians more to for their groceries, and it has been silenced essentially by the opposition leaders. Jagmeet Singh's nowhere. Aaron O'Toole, I've had a lot of Conservatives go, where is he? It's, I guess the new equivalent, put his face on a milk carton is, issue an Amber Alert. But the opposition are nowhere. And this is an actual pocket. People are worried about how COVID policies are affecting them, which we've talked about, but people are worried about being able to, the price of gas and heating their home as it starts to get colder. It's even cold in Toronto now. And so I think that it would be...
No, it isn't.
Well, not Regina cold, not Regina cold, but it was minus 20 with the wind chill yesterday, which is unusual for Toronto. And so I think that it is the job of the opposition to be able to question and ask the government what their plans are. What their plans are in terms of Canadians who may not be able to afford heating their homes this winter.
Speaking of gas prices and climate change, this will make climate change people, their heads blow off. But I was out in Regina over Christmas and it was minus 40. And people run their cars for like 20 minutes before they go anywhere, right? Like this is the standard procedure. You run out from the house or the bar, wherever you are, you start the car and you go back in. You let that thing run and warm up 20 minutes before you go.
How do you not?
Right. It's minus 40. Scott, you got a Hey You?
Yeah, my Hey You is to Freeland. Mr. Freeland, finance. I know it seems like I say this every week, but and David, I think you were making this point yourself on social media. I noticed yesterday a couple times indirectly, but
because I'm passive aggressive on social media,
and maybe just a little bit in life too. But we've got Quebec in a severe lockdown with curfews. We've got Ontario with this latest lockdown, constraining measures in BC. Healthcare systems are what's in the crosshairs here, and their capacity. I think the federal government, I think the classic political play here and the classic political advice would be to say, well, why get in the way of the provinces if they're dealing with all these political burdens? We don't want to own any of that. Just set back. We sent them $4 billion extra for healthcare capacity a few months ago. So we don't, I don't think this moment allows the federal government to remain quiet for long. I think that when you take a look at the consequences of this shutdown on small business and employees in particular, when you take a look at what the federal subsidies are and what that translates into people's pocketbooks, when you look at the fact that people are now looking at being out of their jobs and they're having to pay that HST and a bill that's coming up from last year's, and a lot of them, and you can say, oh, well, you should have known you were going to have to pay tax on it. But, it's a cross to the jaw. You look at the healthcare financial demands. I just think it makes sense for the federal government to say, we are not out of this. We're in deep peril, and we've said we'll be there. So we're not going to say that it's all been good enough and that we've done it already. We're going to enhance these subsidies on a targeted short-term basis. We're going to transfer money before you get together and demand as provinces. We're going to increase, do more one-time CHT transfers. Say we'll come back if we can get past Omicron, and the next thing, we'll come back and have a broader fiscal framework discussion, a broader fiscal federalism discussion about what the right level of transfers are. But we're going to put more money in a one-time shot in order to help. I would do that proactively rather than being forced to do it or being asked to do it. I just think that, it's March 2020 again, man. And you got to act like it's March 2020 again. And the feds need to step up. And I would not be worried about people, complaining and saying, well, is this going to have an inflationary impact? Is this going to blow the fisc and stuff? I think we are back in emergency drill territory, and the federal government should act before it's asked to act.
Hear, hear. My AU goes out to Premier Ford of Ontario. You're fucked. I don't know what's going to happen in the next provincial election. Lots of things can happen. Other parties can screw up. There's a strong tendency to re-elect governments to at least one term in Ontario. But you've had a catastrophic 2021, and I think the Ontario judgment is in on you. You're not adequate to do this job. You're not up for it. You're not smart enough. You're not competent enough. You're not good enough. And I don't know, as I said, what's going to happen in the next provincial election, but the judgment's in on you, and you unquestionably give the PCs their best chance of losing the next election. All right, guys. Thank you. Great to see you in the new year. I was I was so hoping in the fall that we would be seeing each other in person, but we're not. But anyway, you look great virtually. And it was fun to be talking politics with you again. And you know what, people out there, I want to thank everybody who listened to us in 2021 and those of you who've come back for 2022. And I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. See you all next week.